Welcome to the Australian Business Executive Podcast, where we speak with Australia's most influential industry professionals on the business and economic development issues taking place across the country. You can stay up to date with all our content, including our magazines, podcasts and videos by visiting www.theabe.com.au and clicking on subscribe.
Today's guest is Will Winter, National Coordinator with the Minimbah Project. Will, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Jesse, and thank you very much for your interest in our work.
Yeah, of course, you're more than welcome. So when we originally spoke and approached you, I was a little bit confused about the structure of the organization. So I think it's probably a good place to just take us through, a little bit about the journey and where your organization has started from.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the Minimbah Project grew out of an initiative many years ago which was focused on building financial literacy in a small primary school with some university students here in Armidale. And we were going to set up some bank accounts for these kids, and we soon found out that most of the kids, in fact, 95% of the kids at this little school, which is largely Indigenous, but with other kids as well, didn't have birth certificates, about 95%. So we handed the hat around that year. I think we did 100 the first year, and we got the pollies involved and the community, the Lions and all the service groups, and we had some fun just doing what we called a sign-up day. That then grew, and we grew to 300 something, and got respective funding through through the Prime Minister and Cabinet, for instance, federally, and through Optus and a number of other corporates over the years, to the point where we've signed up about 16,000 kids, and of those 16,000 kids, about 3,000 of them have been identified as not having their births registered. So it's been an exciting 10 years or so. We're all volunteers, but we come from various business backgrounds, but we've set up a charity to solve this problem, which is a national problem, in fact, an international problem, where people fundamentally don't have proof of birth documents for lifelong participation in business, in jobs, in sports, in school, in education. The list goes on.
So, I mean, that is what we are here to talk about today. So why don't you give us, a bit more of an overview and why this is an important issue?
Yeah, well, it's important because, you can see it from a justice point of view. It's a birth certificate and birth registration is the first event in a child's life that gives him or her an identity both at a civic level, a human rights level, a leg up into society for schooling, an ancestral belonging, and a community belonging, and also a sense of who they are. So the whole sort of range of identity issues that flow from this, both legal, economic and personal and cultural, that flow from just this one piece of paper that says that you are who you are and your parentage is this.
So has the mission of the Minimbah Project always been focused solely on birth certificates? Or you gave us a bit of a background, but how does this feed into overall who you're trying to help and what you're trying to do?
Yeah, well, at any time, Jess, there are about 300 to 500,000 Australians who don't have access to birth certificates. And even this morning, Victor Dominello, New South Wales Minister, was tweeting that he's going to move towards trying to digitise birth certificates so that the flood victims, for instance, can get a leg up back into society. So there's 500,000 people at any one time. It's quite a large number for a supposedly sort of developed economy to have this number. There's lots of incarceration that flows on from not having appropriate identification. There's lots of lost superannuation. There's lots of, as we learned at the outset, kids who can't get basic access to bank accounts, kids who are being excluded from school, would you believe, because principals are bound by law to actually understand the identity of a child. Kids who are being excluded from sporting groups because they just don't know their age, etc. So it's a one of those sort of wicked problems that just sits quietly under the surface of our day-to-day activities as business people, as community members, and we're on about not only rectifying that and trying to make sure that everyone has a birth certificate, we're trying to also lobby to ensure that there's a digital process and that it's actually a once in a lifetime event that happens when mum has had the baby in the birthing suite. It happens once, no more need for paper, lost paper, reapplying at great expense to through the course of your life.
This wouldn't be considered, I guess, a normal problem to people like myself and maybe people that are listening. Where does this process begin of not even getting one?
It begins because, well, firstly, you need to have your birth registered to access a birth certificate, and the way you verify that is the parents are meant to, within 60 days of the birth of the child, apply for the birth certificate based on the registration that happens, and that then preempts a registration process of the birth and a birth certificate. If the mother or father are not capable or able or otherwise distracted from doing that, the child will miss out on those processes. And it's not until sort of perhaps 4 or 5 years later, when the child wants to go to school, that these fundamental issues come to light, or it could be when the child is 16 wanting to get an internship or a license or whatever, that happens.
And does this is this widespread, or does this tend to affect particular groups more than others?
Yeah, it is widespread in the sense that, well, even Victor Dominello, who's an educated minister in the New South Wales government, is tweeting this morning that he can't find his and his mum can't find hers either, and they're of Italian descent. So it does happen to the most educated and resourced of us, but in the main, it's a low socioeconomic and a disadvantaged family sort of issue, but it's also particularly focused on Indigenous, and the stats are particularly disturbing there for Indigenous kids. About a third of Indigenous kids born every year don't end up with a birth certificate. So it's about 17,000 Indigenous births every year, and there's about 7,000 or 8,000 that don't get birth certificates.
Do you want to touch on a few more of these facts and figures? I mean, that sounds like that's pretty astounding.
It is, and of course, the bureaucracy is it's a state-based bureaucratic system for registration of births. They do what they can, but they're largely paper-based and large and sort of unwieldy organisations that sort of can't work from the ground up like we do. And many a time over the years that we've been working, the registrars themselves have said, keep going with what you're doing because we as government can't do what you do, which is this kind of organic approach in communities. And it's both metro communities and regional communities where we go to calls, we go to schools, we go to sporting events, we get a bunch of JPs and a bunch of service groups and a bunch of family services and others, and we basically have fun. It's a celebration of the communities in which we live, but it's also then it's about ensuring that every child that needs a birth certificate can get one at those events, and that's a particularly novel approach. And from that approach, because people come forward, we actually identify about a third of our applicants for birth certificates are actually identified as not having their births registered.
Right.
And often you'll get multi-generations. You'll get great-grandmother, grandmother and mother, or child and mum and grandmother, all sitting around a table saying, I've never had one. Some of the grandmothers don't even know how old they are because they've been part of the stolen generation or whatever happened, and it's a best guess.
So what we want to do, we're using this interview hopefully as an opportunity to broaden your appeal and your message, and especially with some of the, the businesses and corporates that listen and read us. So how can businesses and corporates get involved with the work that you do?
Yeah, we've had some pretty amazing support from corporates over the years, Jesse, from Optus and from the universities and from a lot of private benefactors as well, but also from UniSuper. I think it's the third largest superannuation company in Australia, member-based. So we love to engage with corporates around. It's a great way of corporates building their presence in their local community. So if any corporate would like to actually have a sign-up event in their own situation, we would be happy to talk with them and resource them to do that, and maybe even come and visit. Invariably, these things work best when a business would like to work with some community-based organisations as well. It might be sporting groups, it could be hospitals, it could be service groups, whatever. It's all about identifying where the networks are and going from there, because the need is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's particularly needed in lower socioeconomic areas. So if businesses operate in sort of in lower socioeconomic areas, or want to venture into those spaces, then that they're the first point of call. But basically anywhere is a good space to start.
Oftentimes with organizations, that they want to know how this money is used and where it goes, and how much of that support goes to on the ground activities.
Yeah, totally. And I'm the same. If I give money to other charities, as I do, it's the first question I ask. And we are very keen and very clear about this with Originate Australia, which is the charity that we've set up with some robust governance and all the DGR and status that we need to get tax deductibility, etc. We've got some amazing board members, but we're very keen, and it's basically every dollar. Every dollar will go towards birth certificates. It's the rest is voluntary. We've tens of thousands of volunteer hours around this, and if we can get some scale back again, we might actually end up implementing some administrative support, which might change that somewhat. But we are very dedicated to ensure that, sort of, if you give $87, which is the cost of a birth certificate here in New South Wales, or it might be something slightly about that in all jurisdictions, we will ensure that that goes towards buying one birth certificate for one child or one person. Generally, birth certificates, if we were to round it up, it's about $100 a birth certificate. So if your business wanted to sponsor a child or a number of children, we would be happy to hear from you on that basis, and say, well, we can sponsor so many children into birth certificates this year. Or some of the companies that we're working with are looking at salary sacrifice, and members are actually contributing a certain amount or pledging a certain amount every year to support this work.
We're starting to wrap up now. So do you want to tell us, where is the organization headed? What's your mission into the future?
Yeah, well, thanks. It's a great question. We've had a bit of a hiatus in the last 2 or 3 years with the COVID. Our work is very much face to face. We can do it remotely, and we can do it that way. But invariably, it's highly relational, and so we've been on ice in effect for the COVID period. But we're at a point now where we're building up our financial resources, and we're starting to plan this year to do a road trip out into northwestern New South Wales. We may end up down in Victoria too, to work with UniSuper down there and their members in perhaps Echuca or other places down there. So we're starting to get our programming together this year. We're very much our programming is very much limited to the funds that we can raise in any given year. We could do 1,000 or more every year, or even in one event. Sometimes, if you go to the right event, you can get a whole bunch of people coming through. So that's where we're at. The other side of what we do, of course, is we love to, as you have indicated at the outset here, it's a hidden problem. So we like to expose the problem and talk about this as a celebration of belonging and community. This whole thing, it's about who we are. It's about practical reconciliation at Indigenous and other levels, all sorts of social strata involved. It's really amazing when you sort of sit in these spaces to see the joy that comes forward through people just being in a happy space where they're all recognising each other. And I've got lots of stories about how that works. So that's our program for the years ahead. And down the track, we're also lobbying, and we want this to be sort of hopefully a federal system that is, once only event at the birth event. Child is registered, and there's a digital process then for proof of birth from there on. No more need for ongoing cost and disruption. Billions of dollars of economic loss through people not having appropriate identity in this economy.
Well, hopefully, for any corporates, businesses either listening to this podcast or reading the affiliated editorial, we'll hope that you will reach out to Will and his team and get involved. And Will, thank you for your time today.
Thanks for your interest, and welcome all who want to be involved. Thanks, Jesse.
This has been a production of the Australian Business Executive, a division of Romulus Rising Proprietary Limited. All rights reserved. You can stay up to date with the Australian Business Executive, including our magazines, podcasts and videos, by visiting www.theabe.com.au and clicking on subscribe.